Bonjour.
Bonjour, bonjour. Mattia, morning. Very good. Jürgen, du kannst auch das wenden. So, good morning, everyone. Very warm welcome to all of you here in the room and also online. My name is Wolfgang Schläger. I'm the head of the EBRD office here in Brussels. And I welcome you to this very important event, which admittedly has a very long title. So, but it's basically about the reform of corporate governance in Ukraine. You will hear all about this in a very fantastic panel, which we have after the opening session. And in the opening session, it's my great pleasure to have with us our first vice president, Jürgen Richtering, who will give us in a minute the opening speech, followed then online by the minister, the Deputy Minister of Economy, Mr. Sobolev, who is in charge for the reform. And then it's with a great pleasure also to have Gert-Jan Kopan with us, the Director General of DG NIR, who, besides his very heavy schedule, is with us this morning. So, Jürgen, you have the floor, please.
And also a very warm welcome from my side. I'm delighted to be here. And when I say to welcome you all, I had to say here friends from near and far. And when I say near, I don't only mean DG near. That was my little Dutch joke, but I think not everybody understands it. As we stand here today, ladies and gentlemen, it's important to cast our minds back to February 2022. Ukraine applied for EU membership in the most dramatic circumstances on the 5th day of Russia's full-scale invasion, when Ukraine's very existence as an independent state was hanging in the balance. Fast forward to this month, to November 2023, the European Commission has recommended that the Council opens accession negotiations with Ukraine. From dark and uncertain circumstances, the EU has risen to the occasion and has decided to make this geostrategic investment in Europe's security and stability. This reinforces again what I always say. The EU is not only an economic union, it is also a peace union. Ladies and gentlemen, EU accession will provide a clear direction of travel and a roadmap for reforms in Ukraine. But the adoption of the Ukraine facility and the Ukraine plan already represents or presents a unique opportunity whereby the EU can help crowd in support from other donors and IFIs. Acceding to the EU would serve as a basis for the alignment of reform conditionalities linked to the disbursements of funds, ultimately helping to achieve the shared objective of EU integration. As first Vice President of the EBRD, I'm proud of our history as the largest institutional investor in Ukraine, with a staggering cumulative investment of more than 19 billion euros in more than 500 projects. And since the outbreak of the war, the EBRD already reached its target of deploying at least 3 billion euro of financing in Ukraine in 2022 and 2023. Perhaps most importantly, however, in terms of signaling our shareholders' unwavering support for our activities in the country, only last week our board of directors decided to recommend a capital increase of 4 billion euros. This injection of capital, the first in our 30-plus year history, will enable us to provide significant and sustained investment for Ukraine, now and into the future. It is sometimes easy when working from the comforts of our respective offices in London, Brussels, Paris, or wherever you may be, to think of our work in Ukraine as something abstract or theoretical. I think we can all fall into this trap because to truly comprehend the ongoing suffering of our friends and clients is too much to bear and can make us feel like nothing we do as multilateral institutions can ever be enough. The sheer number of framework agreements, MOUs, deep dives, panel discussions, no matter how substantive and well-intentioned, can make us wonder that while the will and determination to help is undoubtedly there, what in fact is making a genuine difference on the ground. In this respect, I want to draw your attention to two examples of public sector investments that the EBRD has made since the outbreak of the war. Firstly, an over $500 million investment in Ukrenergo, a record speed approval of $370 million financing package in the winter of 2022 during attacks on critical energy infrastructure to enable the company to make urgent repairs and to keep the energy system stable. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we literally helped to keep the lights on. Or a smaller 4.5 million investment to Ukreposta. In response to winter blackouts, we supported the acquisition of Starlink satellite internet terminals as well as power generators and batteries. Yes, we literally helped to keep loved ones connected. And while these are just two examples of interventions we have made since the war, it is important to note that the EBRD has been engaged with the state-owned enterprises and corporate governance reforms and supporting public sector clients long before this. From leveraging large sovereign deals to launch and advance systemic reforms in the most important national SOEs, including the national railways, to developing an ambitious corporate governance and gas trading reform package for Naftogaz all the way back in 2015. So while we have been doing the work this whole time, without doubt, after February 24th, 2022, the urgency of SOE reforms has clearly intensified. In Ukraine, where the wartime economy has resulted in an even stronger role of the state, a well-governed SOE sector will be critical to build investor confidence for the years of reconstruction to follow. Ukraine's ability to attract investment for reconstruction and progress towards EU accession depends on its ability to tackle corruption, creating an attractive investment environment, and a level playing field. That is why we have been assisting the government of Ukraine to draft a critical law on corporate governance of SOEs, which aims to bring Ukraine's sector closer to international standards, including those of the OECD, I might add. I look forward to the adoption of the law this year, as it is an important step in the right direction, which will send a strong signal to Ukraine's international partners and market investors alike. But ladies and gentlemen, I think the biggest challenge is to strike a balance between focusing on achievable and reasonable goals during wartime and retaining a vision of the system Ukraine aims to build for the future. I have to say, no matter where I go or who I speak to in the international community working in Ukraine, I'm struck by the devotion of the Ukrainian authorities to implement these much-needed reforms, even during such tumultuous time. It is a testament to the men and women of Ukraine that so much progress has been made in this regard, despite their personal hardships. So now is the time to leverage this momentum and to not let it count for nothing. Ukrainians are not alone in this challenge. We are grateful to have a strong coalition of international partners, including the EU, the G7 governments, IMF, OECD, and the World Bank, that work in lockstep to support the government of Ukraine with these important reforms. In closing, I want to thank all participants for being here today, and I understand more are online. Particularly my EU colleagues, as the main anchor for reforms critical for Ukraine's future, and the OECD, who are setting international benchmarks for SOE governance that our countries of operations aspire to follow. And last but certainly not least, representative of the Ukrainian public sector. Thank you all, and I'm looking forward to a fruitful discussion and most importantly, meaningful follow-ups after the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. So we have now a minister for, the Deputy Minister again, for Economy, Mr. Sobolev, online. Mr. Sobolev, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be virtually present at this meeting. I see several of well-known colleagues, and I salute you, but I couldn't come. So the corporate governance reform of Ukraine is very important, and I guess the first obvious thing is that Ukraine has a really big government, state-owned sector. So there's more than 3,100 state-owned companies, but we also know that out of which only handful, well, not handful, but around 800 are operating, and out of them just half was profitable. This means that this sector has a lot of fiscal risks in it, but also a lot of opportunities. So these companies could operate and be profitable, but we think that better corporate governance could lead us to that. The second very important point that we understand after this full-scale invasion broke out is the role that the state-owned companies play. So if you talk to any Ukrainian, and basically probably any foreigner that came to Ukraine during these days, and we welcome that, and thank you for that, for supporting us and being here, is you would probably name at least one state-owned company, most will say like Ukrzaliznytsia, that does a terrific service of saving people and providing services at low cost and reliable services. So this means that the importance of the state-owned sector is just growing during these stressful times. But it also leads to the problems that this invasion creates for this state-owned sector. And one way of tackling these problems is exactly better corporate governance. The work on corporate governance is one of priorities for the Ministry of Economy. And what we see, and we will continue to do that during the next year. And our most focus and how we look at the corporate governance during the next year and the years to come is the way to generate investment in the country and the revenues towards the budget. So everybody understands the position that Ukraine is in, and I think that these two goals are very important. That's how all the corporate reform actions will be looked at through these two lenses. Will this bring additional revenues? For example, like the better governance of existing companies, or privatization, or better corporate governance, attracting, for example, loans like the ones that EBRD provide for these companies to provide better services, to create more jobs, and to build something new, and to recover from the damages that Russia is creating. I just wanted to highlight some recent examples of successes of corporate governance reform that the government of Ukraine is undertaking, even in these stressful times, which is makes everything a bit more complicated. So one is we're corporatizing Energoatom, one of the largest companies, state-owned companies in Ukraine, and maybe just companies in Ukraine, very important for energy sector, generating a lot of energy in Ukraine, and like having occupied stations, and so lots of problems there, but we're going through it. The decree to corporatize, the decision to corporatize Energoatom was made in July, and already we have completed the appraisal of the company. So right now it's being officially approved, but the work itself is done. We know like what, where, and how much it costs to put it in the capital of a new joint stock company, Energoatom, that should be created by the end of the year. The second is just recently we established an independent supervisory board of OGDSU and transferred from like two-tier structure to one-tier structure, joint stock company structure of this very important operator. It was one of the IMF benchmarks, and also one of the very important metrics that our international partners judge us in, and I think we delivered on time. And then we just recently, Cabinet of Ministers passed a decision to announce a competition for independent member of Ukrenergo. So the one was missing, and we'll start looking for him or her. Then there's also updating the nomination procedure. Right now, it is in the final stages, and we hope to get it passed this week. The updated nomination procedure and the works of nominating committee developed together with our international partners. So we will pass this through Cabinet of Ministers either this week or early next week. And then we're also working on this big 5593D law, which is at the final stages. So there are just several items needed to be cleared, and will be ready to pass in the parliament, which would be the next stage of the corporate governance reform, and which will add a lot of work for the next year, but also a lot of possibilities to bring the corporate governance to a new level, and as I said, attract more investments and generate more revenues towards the budget. So about the plans for the next year. So basically, once we passed through this 5593 law, there would be a lot of Cabinet of Ministers decrees and policies that will describe how this sector, how this reform move forward over like the next 4 years, which is also will be described in Ukraine plan, as also mentioned here. The first, we will need to approve the state ownership policy, a really like comprehensive document of why we hold these companies, why these need to be privatized, and what needed to be done with those. This state ownership policy will encapsulate both the dividend policy and the remuneration policy and all the other like important aspects on how the boards would work. Then we will approve the privatization strategy, and also finalize the triage that we've been doing throughout this year to set out the strategic companies that should stay in the state ownership, and others should probably be privatized, in which order, and that would be described in the privatization strategy, and then the list of the companies would be voted by Verkhovna Rada. So it would be very clear, and the list should be definitely short, not like 700 companies that exist in the list today. We're also looking at consolidating ownership functions, and just recently we talked to the French agency doing that, and it's also like very. It looks like this model has all the aspects that Ukraine looks for, but we're like keen to talk through that and then develop this concept throughout the next year, and start going forward. Because right now all the state companies, they are managed by 80 different government agencies, which is definitely suboptimal. Then we will be working on transferring all those that needed to be privatized or liquidized to the state property fund for it to privatize through transparent auction. And then we will be corporatizing the rest. So there is a handful big companies left that should be privatized over the next years, not privatized, but corporatized over the next years. And we will also instate independent supervisory boards at those companies. So everything goes, of course, according to OECD principles as described in the law, but then we will also have to look at the current war situation. So sometimes more tight fiscal controls on the behavior of state-owned companies is warranted, and also our international partners support us in that. By the end of the year, we will be probably launching some of the, or maybe at the start of the year, we'll be launching the evaluation of the supervisory boards according to this 5593D law, because it will allow to do that. And it would be really, I guess, a very good, transparent process that will alleviate all the questions that sometimes people have about the supervisory boards, because we will have regular assessment of how they are functioning, and then we'll be making decisions on that. And last but not least, the strengthening of nomination procedure and the function, the feedback from this assessment going to the competitions, going back to the current existing board members, it will also be strengthened during the next year. So as you can hear, there's a lot of work, and I'm proud that this is a joint work. I think we have a very fruitful cooperation with EBRD. EBRD plays a leading role in that, but also with all our international partners, as in EU, so in US and G7 countries. So we very welcome that, and as I say, this is very important for Ukraine's recovery to get corporate governance done right, properly. So it will attract more investment in Ukraine, expedite recovery, and make the country more self-sustainable. Thank you very much for today's event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Deputy Minister, and having had time this morning. We know he's very busy, and good luck with all the work which is in front of you. And now, the keynote speech of Gert-Jan Koopman, Director General from DG NEAR. Thank you.
So, dear Jürgen, dear colleagues, dear Minister, it's a pleasure and an honor to be able to join you this morning at this very timely conference. I think in his opening remarks, your first Vice President has already set out the context in which we operate, and I can only underline his words with regard to the incredible path that Ukraine has embarked on, the determination and commitment to its modernization and European future, which has led to an acceleration of crucial reforms across a wide range of areas that actually led us to the recommendation to the Council to open accession negotiations. Just for context, I don't think that we have ever had such a rapid process of a country becoming a candidate in a wartime situation, and then within the space of 18 months being put forward for opening negotiations. Now, working with our Ukrainian partners, the one thing that strikes me is that they do not take any pleasure in this speed. Actually, they think the speed is too low, and they continuously knock on our doors to accelerate the process, also underlining their commitments to further going reforms. I think that's incredibly important, and sustaining the pace of reforms will be vital to integrating Ukraine in the European Union. For that, of course, the transformation of their economy will be absolutely essential. I would even say a precondition for successful enlargement. And here, the work we are doing with the EBRD and with other partners is essential. Ukraine lost nearly 30% of its GDP last year, bounced back to growth this year, but it's a country with a very small economy and a population that is at levels of economic development that will need to be boosted very considerably, first and foremost, obviously, in their own interest, but also to be able to join the EU. So the modernization of their economy is at the heart, really, of the enlargement process. And this is, of course, also why the Commission proposed the Ukraine facility, to which Jürgen made a reference earlier on, which really aims not just to reconstruct the country, but to modernize it in the process. And that is very much in line with what Ukraine itself has said it wants to do, is aimed at the realization of the principle of building back better. And it is a commitment to a transformation that will go hand in hand with the enlargement process. The way we see it in the Commission is that enlargement will set essentially the regulatory framework for the country, will open up the internal market and the so-called four freedoms, therefore providing the conditions for rapid economic growth. But at the same time, the reconstruction process and the modernization linked to it will be essential to make full use of that potential which is offered through enlargement. And as I said, without that being successful, enlargement is hard to imagine. Vice versa, without enlargement, this reconstruction is hard to imagine. So I sometimes joke that reconstruction and modernization on the one hand and the enlargement process on the other hand are like twins joined at the hip. In that context, this conference today about SOEs and the modernization of SOEs is absolutely critical. And I think both Jürgen and Oleksiy already referred to the key role that SOEs play in the Ukrainian economy. They are the largest employer. They are the largest center of private capital and public capital, fixed capital that is. And they also employ the largest share of workers in the economy. So simply on the basis of those facts, we will need to pay very great attention to SOEs. Now, the starting point is mixed. I would say that before the war, the SOE sector was actually showing negative productivity growth and therefore was actually destroying value added. Very worrisome given the share in the economy. During the war, in a way, I think the SOE sector managed to keep the economy going, and that, of course, is a plus. But in the longer run, the reforms which the minister outlined are absolutely essential. And I believe that the tidying up of the governance of SOEs in conjunction with market restructuring is going to be at the heart of the modernization strategy. Without ensuring that there is a level playing field between public and private companies, the potential offered by our internal market will simply not be realized because there will be no market entry by private companies and therefore also no significant growth. So competitive neutrality is really key and vital also to address the productivity problem which I mentioned, because without a better allocation of capital and resources more generally in the economy, going to companies that are the most productive, it's hard to see how growth can take off. It's also going to be very hard to see how foreign direct investment, which will be absolutely key to reconstruction, private sector investment, will materialize at scale without these changes being introduced. And finally, we know that the SOE sector is consuming very significant public finance resources, and with a very difficult situation regarding the Ukrainian budget with very limited fiscal space, this again would hold back growth, given that these means cannot be invested elsewhere in the economy. So very important reasons to focus on this sector. I'm very encouraged about what I heard this morning from Olexil, and indeed my teams have been working very closely with international partners, but crucially also with the Ukrainian government to analyze how best these reforms can be included in the Ukraine plan, which will be the precondition for accessing the 50 billion euros worth Ukraine facility. For me, this is one of the most important elements of the plan, one of the most important chapters. And I'm sure that Anna Jarosz-Fries, the director of the Ukraine service, who is with us this morning and will be on the panel, will say much more about that. But I would just like to underline that without this reform being far-reaching and effective, and therefore successful, the Ukraine plan probably will not be able to deliver fully. So there's a lot riding on these themes. It's extremely encouraging to see so many people also online joining this event. It is a great comfort to know that the EBRD has such a broad experience in this field, and we are honored to work with you very closely on these matters. And I hope that over the next weeks, we're really talking weeks now, the different building blocks will fall into place. First, the Ukrainian government finalizing its Ukraine plan, then European Council, I should say, signing off on the budget needed for the Ukraine facility, and finally the legislative process of the Ukraine facility closing so that the plan can be officially submitted and then enter into force. We expect that to happen in Q1 of next year, so it is really getting close. And whilst it is true that the war is still raging, I also know and see every day when I work with our Ukrainian partners that the polar star of their future and their European anchor is motivating them to undertake these reforms. And with this new framework, we will be providing, I hope, essential support. So I look forward to a very successful event this morning. I would like to thank the organizers for taking the initiative, and I wish our Ukrainian colleagues all the very best in these difficult times. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gert-Jan. And now I hand over to the moderator of the panel, Milica Delivic, who is our director for policy and governance. So, you will introduce yourself, and you will introduce also our panelists. So.
Thank you. Can I please invite my panelists to join me on stage? Whichever way you prefer to. I think you probably come closer. Yeah. Dear guests, respected panelists, good morning all, and thank you for joining us for this very important discussion. I think we benefited from hearing from our opening speeches, which provided a great framework for what we are going to delve into deeper in this conversation. I think we've heard a lot about state sector in Ukraine and what are the relevant issues. This, I think, is a topic which is of critical importance for Ukraine's economic success after the war. The reason is very simple. It is a very big state sector in the country, and even before the war, we've heard Deputy Minister Sobolev. The number of SOEs was significant, more than 3,000. It produced before the war around the 10th of Ukraine's output, and it employed around 18% of Ukrainian workforce. Fighting the war imposed additional demands on the public sector, so it increased, surpassing in size anything that we can see in any of the EU member states. So for the success of Ukraine's economy after the war and for its successful integration into the European Union, the key would be to reduce the role of the state in the economy and to make sure that in remaining SOEs, the standards of governance, of anti-corruption are such that it meets transparency and accountability. This, I think, it's vital, and we've heard Deputy Minister Sobolev talk about confidence of international partners and investors, which will be crucial for the reconstruction process. But I think even more importantly, it is crucial for trust of its own citizens. This basically means building Ukraine that Ukrainian citizens would actually like to see, and meeting these demands of transparency, accountability, and better delivery of services for the Ukrainian citizens. I think we were all reassured by the commitment of Deputy Minister Sobolev to the reform in this area, and we can now, with this panel, discuss more concrete reform challenges and also how we as international partners can support this reform and what are actually the challenges that we currently see within the country and how to balance the challenges of fighting the war and challenges of preparing for the future that will follow it. And I am really glad that I have such an excellent panel of speakers, and also that we have such a great gender balance in the room. Nobody can accuse us of being a manel. So I will start with introducing my panelists in the room. Anna Jarosz-Fries, Acting Director of the Ukraine Service in the DG NEAR of the European Commission Directorate for European Neighborhood Policy and Enlargement Negotiations. It's quite a mouthful. Very good to have you with us. Olena Kibenko, Judge of the Supreme Court of Ukraine, and Sara Sultan, Senior Advisor with the OECD and Head of the OECD Working Party of State Ownership and Privatization Practices. Online, we have Volodymyr Kudrytsky, Chief Executive Officer of Ukrenergo. Welcome and great to have you, Volodymyr. And we have our own Matteo Patrone, our own Managing Director for Ukraine and Ukraine, but wider than that, Eastern Europe and the Caucasus, Matteo Patrone. Both Matteo and Volodymyr are in Kiev, and thank you very much for giving your time for this discussion. So I will start with Matteo. I initially wanted to start with the context and to start with Olena, but given that Matteo is in Kiev and will actually have a meeting which will partly be discussing some of the issues that we are discussing here right now, we are reversing the order and starting with Matteo. Matteo, EBRD has over time, and especially during your time in Ukraine, invested in pretty much every SOE in the country. What have we learned over this period? And especially also knowing that we have been keen to foster SOE reform in Ukraine before the war, in all the other countries where we work. And how do you see striking the balance between fighting the war but also meeting reform commitments, which are important for securing a successful European post-war reconstruction?
Thank you very much, Ms. I hope you can hear me well in the room. Thanks very much indeed for inviting me, and Volodya and I will meet later on today, by the way. And I think you're right. Our engagement in the SOE sector and the SOB sector has been traditionally very intense in the country, but we have not engaged with every single SOE, and we have engaged with those SOEs that have shown potential for change and potential for partnership with us beyond financing only. And this is actually the way we act in the country and the way we act in a sector that has been remarked by particularly Jürgen and Alexei is extremely prominent in the Ukrainian economy. And the way we do it is by coupling financing and technical assistance for institutional capacity building. And this is what we have been doing with a number of our partners in the country, Ukrenergo being certainly one of the best practices, but also Naftogaz over the years, Ukrzaliznytsia, a number of banks, and the Agency for Restoration. And you, Minister, know that very well because you were instrumental in preparing and structuring the Memorandum of Understanding with Prime Minister Schmigel in 2020, which opened to our pilot project for institutional capacity building in then Ukravtodo, that now is morphing into the Agency for Restoration. Institutional capacity building focus on compliance and governance and procurement practices. But also we take if we take a wider view, we take a more holistic approach. And so we act indeed at company level with financing, with technical assistance, or by, for instance, participating in the nomination committee for the appointment of supervisory board members. But we also take a sectorial approach. And again, Ukrenergo is a good case in point, whereby we couple for the new package that we hope to sign in the next couple of weeks. We also engage in sectorial reforms for mitigating market distortions in the electricity sector, or at systemic level. And our work with, in particular, the Deputy Minister Sobolev on the 5593D is a good example of that. And I think that is really the lesson learned. You cannot approach such a wide-ranging topic and problem and issue and opportunity as corporate governance without looking from the different prisms and the different level of engagement, systemic, sectorial, and more granular at a company level. When it comes to our engagement now during wartime, first of all, let me say one thing. Today is the 10th anniversary of Maidan, and the country is a different country from what it was in 2013 and 2014, and the journey that the country has undertaken on various aspects of reforms, including indeed corporate governance, is nothing short of amazing. It has not been a linear trajectory by any stretch of imagination, and we all know, for instance, what happened in Naftogaz over the years. We were not particularly thrilled to see the dismissal of a CEO through the temporary dismissal of the supervisory board a few years back. But at the same time, we are seeing now a new, very well-functioning supervisory board in the company, the restoration of trust in the company with a new management, and that's why, for instance, we are engaging again with a package of 500 million euros last year and at the beginning of this year, and today I'm going to sign another package for 200 million euro with Mr. Chernyshov, which would hopefully ensure stability of gas supply for the winter. And so there's been a very good journey, difficult, but very positive overall. And at times of war, clearly we need a good dose of pragmatism, realism, and also creativity in our joint work in on the reform path. But I really reject the notion of that running a war economy and reforming the country are two competing agendas. I don't think that is the case. Indeed, the example of Ukrenergo shows that this is really not the case. The company has been able to keep the lights on and perform outstandingly, remarkably well over last winter, exactly because has undertaken a serious path of reforms in the previous years and was well equipped to do that. Similarly, the entire banking sector, which has been reformed over the years, has shown to be particularly solid and has helped keeping both microfinancial stability and support to the real economy, exactly because of the solidity of or the improvement in the governance of the banks. And Alexei, I think, mentioned Ukrazaliznytsia. That's another positive case. So I think we need to be pragmatic. It is clear that there is a need to keep under control parafiscal risks, but it's also clear that that should not go to the detriment of the governance of companies or agencies. And that's why we keep engaging with a number of those, including indeed the Agency for Restoration. And this is actually going to be one of the topics I'm going to discuss with Deputy Prime Minister Kubrakov in less than an hour. And that's why through also the increase of capital that Jürgen mentioned, that our shareholders hopefully are going to grant us, following the advice of our board of directors. In the next years, we will continue working with the SOE and the SOB sector with a view of preparing it for commercialization, pre-privatization, and privatization, and reforming it, because given the prominent role that it has in the economy, this is a crucial ingredient in order to improve the investment climate in the country and attract private investments in the country, which is in turn absolutely crucial in order to rebuild the economy. If we take as reference the sum of over $400 billion needed in order to converge in the Ukrainian economy to EU standards. So in order to attract private sector, you need to reform the public sector, and corporate governance is going to be a crucial ingredient for that. And the time is not going to be once the peace is going to be reached. The time for that is now, and is now at every possible level of engagement.
Thank you very much, Matteo, especially for reminding us that this is actually today the 10th anniversary of the Maidan revolution. If you look what has happened over these 10 years, when the Ukrainians took to the street because of the association agreement and deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, and today we are actually talking about a country which is on its way to becoming a member of the European Union. And it's fighting a war for its independence. It's quite a different situation, but also a confirmed European path, which was very much in doubt at that time. Thank you for your participation, and as always, please reiterate to Deputy Prime Minister Kubrakov our readiness to help in any reform endeavor.
Can I just add one thing? Indeed. I will do that, and I would also reiterate that not only we are always ready to engage, but we are also fairly innovative in our approach. And I'd like to mention a couple of examples. For instance, the work we are doing in the Agency for Restoration on procurement through our smart program, which is a fairly new program designed in order to address the SOEs and governance in general at war times. And another example of that is what we are doing, again, in close cooperation with the EU and other partners, more related to the solidarity lane, which is the study that we are conducted and now we are implementing for the Bessarabia region in order to diversify routes of exports out of the Black Sea.
Thank you very much, Matteo. We have indeed put together a program to support SOEs more generally, and in particular to help Ukraine during the wartime and to be able to work on governance nationally and within companies, and also to link it with sector reforms. And within this program, we rolled out important procurement reforms, which you mentioned. Thank you. I will now turn to Volodymyr. Volodymyr, you've heard what Matteo said. How does it resonate to you? And for all of us, Ukrenergo is a symbol of Ukrainian resilience in view of persisting despite all the attacks on critical infrastructure. But it is also, and Matteo made this link, it is also a symbol of successful corporate governance reform. Drawing from your experience, what would be your recommendations for other Ukrainian state-owned enterprises? And what would be something that you would expect actually policymakers to do to be able to help you better? And also us as international partners, we don't want to spare us from that responsibility.
First of all, thank you very much. I'm very flattered and grateful for the warm words that I've heard from you and from Matteo. I need to say that I cannot agree more with Matteo about the link between success and the governance. Our company has been transformed from very ordinary post-Soviet state enterprise to a joint stock company with all elements of corporate governance that you would normally find at any Western public company. And I would say that this transformation of governance, of course, brought a lot of benefits for the organization. And this drastic change actually allowed us to do many things. Not only we managed before the invasion to reconstruct our power grid quite intensively and accumulate this famous stock of equipment that saved us last winter, but also during the invasion, we managed to connect our power grid to Europe, and we managed to keep the lights on. And referring to the words of the Director General of the DGNIR, that during the invasion period, SOEs of Ukraine demonstrated resilience and actually kept the economy running. I need to say that it is only to the extent that those SOEs that were acting as efficient private or public companies were able to do that. Because not all SOEs are currently efficient, of course. And I need to say that transformation that made us who we are now, it took more than 7 years. It started in early 2016 or even 2015, and we had to pass a long way. I need to say that it is really important to have trustful both management and supervisory board layers in the company. It's not enough to only appoint efficient and prominent supervisory board. You need to have also a very trustworthy management layer, which is able to act as a team. For us, for Ukrenergo team, the key to success was that we were sharing the same values. We are the team because we do believe in the same things. we were united by a very clear target to synchronize Ukrainian power system with SOE. Now we, of course, are motivated by the mission to keep the lights on in the homes of Ukrainians. And this is really important that the management acts as one team. And it's really important to address all the possible conflicts and deviations from these shared values of the organization. So we started to build up a new culture of the company based on the fact that we have a good governance structure. This governance structure has allowed us to start building a new culture, shifting from post-Soviet culture to a new type of culture that of course rewards productivity, efficiency, but also it rewards adherence to those values that we all share in the organization. And I need to say that corporate governance, improving of corporate governance, has allowed us to attract a lot of capital. And also during the invasion time, we were able to raise more than $1.1 billion in total in form of loans, grant financing, in-kind support from different donors. And to some extent, we've become an organization which transferred money, which was able to inject money into the sector, allowing not only to Ukrenergo teams, but also to other companies to repair, to reconstruct the damaged equipment, etc., etc. And now what we would like to do, we would like to, together with EBRD and other stakeholders, we would like to work together to find out what should be the conditions to attract capital investments into new generation facilities to Ukraine, to transform our power system, to build new generation facilities, to decentralize generation, and to build several gigawatts of wind, solar, biomass, battery storage, gas peaking installations in Ukraine, which should bring us to something close to net zero in terms of power system. And this requires, again, good governance and attraction of private capital, a level playing field. And my advice to policymakers, or my expectation, would be that, of course, Ukraine has to get rid of the 95 or 99% of the existing SOEs, get rid in terms of privatization. Some of them may be closed, some of them may be privatized. And only those few strategic companies that could be kept as a state-owned should also be, all of them should be corporatized, should have independent supervisory board. And before the invasion, we were thinking actually we in Naftogaz were thinking about IPO, partial IPO. I think in the future, for strategic companies that where the state will still have majority of votes in the share capital, I still think that it would be a good idea to allow at least partially private capital to enter those organizations to ensure that those reforms of corporate governance are irreversible. So I think our integration into financial markets, energy markets, international markets will boost this transfer to a better governance. But I don't think we need to create 3,000 supervisory boards in all the SOEs. We really need to understand what companies should be kept as state-owned, but all other companies should be either privatized or closed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 3,000 boards would really be quite a challenge, and but so it will be, moving towards privatization and corporatization of whatever remains for as long as circumstances are as challenging as they are now. This reform that we are discussing today is not taking place in a vacuum. It takes place in existing legal and institutional framework. And I am really glad that we have one of the preeminent experts on corporate law, a justice of the Ukrainian Supreme Court, Olena Kybenko, here with us today. And I wanted to ask you, in particular, thanks for coming all the way to Ukraine. This is a long journey, and we really appreciate your presence here with us in person. And I wanted to ask you, how do you see the context for this reform and generally institutional and legal framework, and particular challenges for SOE reform that you have established in your experience as corporate law expert, and what you can see as a Supreme Court justice?
Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be here. I'm sorry my English is not perfect, but I try to do my best, and I think it's very important to obtain some information from insider from the judicial system. And before I became a judge, I was a professor at university. I have a lot of books regarding corporate governance issues, so I can compare situation 20 years ago and now. And I would like to tell that now situation is much better than it was been in 1999, for example, when everything is started in Ukraine, new businesses. But we have a lot of state enterprises, and Prime Minister Sobolev told us about that. We have about 30,000 of state enterprises belong to the state, more than 14,000 of municipality enterprises, and actually it's not sufficient legislation to operate for such enterprises, because we have a lot of acts, a lot of laws. First of all, I would like to mention civil and commercial codes of Ukraine to regulate activity of all legal entities. Also, we have a law of joint stock companies, we have law on limited liability company, we have law on management of object of state property, law on privatization of state and municipal property, but we don't have law about state and municipal enterprises, and it's a problem because our commercial code regulates activity of this organizational form of enterprises, but it contains only several articles. I don't remember exactly. I think it's about 4 or 5 articles devoted to regulation of activity of state enterprises. For example, new law of joint stock companies contains much more provisions, as well as the law of on limited liability company. So, as a judge, I see that it's a lack. It's not sufficient legislation to regulate such organizational forms. And we try to fill this gap in our judicial activity, in our decisions. So we try to develop new rules, and in this process, the principles of governance, the guidance on corporate governance of state-owned enterprises helps us. Previously, judges were very reluctant to use such norms, but now we actively use them. For example, in this year, in my last 2 judgments, I used the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development guidelines on corporate governance on state-owned enterprises. And I would like to say that actually I think that our judicial practice, our decision, our judgments shift society and shift economy and shift regulation, because law, it's like a scheme, and we look at the scheme and try to decide case with all its individual facts and obstacles. And if we look to our judicial practice, I try to identify some problems in the activity of state-owned enterprises. And among these problems, I can see that, for example, we have many cases on unfair state dividend regulations and unfair decisions on dividends. Also, we have many cases regarding moratorium on foreclosure of property of state-owned enterprises, because in Ukraine we have a problem because assets of state-owned enterprises cannot be foreclosure cannot be used to pay the debts for other creditors, and that is a problem. And recently, the Supreme Court issued a decision. We say that this moratorium is unconstitutional, but after that, the Grand Chamber of the Supreme Court overruled this decision and says that moratorium is okay and that only legislature can remove these norms from our legislation. Also, we have many cases regarding liability of directors for damages caused to the enterprises. It's a new category of court cases, and previously courts mainly denied such claim, but now we have changed the practice, and it's a real possibility to compensate losses damages that the director, the member of the board can do to enterprises. Also, we have a lot of cases about declaring contracts of state enterprises null. This case is mainly filed by State Attorney Office. They are very active, and we have a lot of such cases in our court and court of other instances. Also, we have a lot of cases regarding property issues because state and municipal enterprise, they are not owner of their assets. They have their assets like a user. It's a very strange legal regime, and it caused many problems in the activity. So we have many cases regarding this regime, and I think now one of the cases went to the Grand Chamber as a significant legal problem, and we are waiting for the result of this case, and we are waiting for the regulation. I think it's all that I would like to tell you. If you have any questions after the end of this section, you can ask me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olena. We certainly will come back with more questions. Relationship between OECD and Ukraine has been a very long-standing one, and in the area of SOEs, Ukraine expressed its wish to adhere to OECD SOE principles even before the war. What are the recommendations that the OECD would now find as relevant during this wartime for Ukraine to implement? Sarah, please.
Thank you so much, Milika. And again, thank you to EBRD, partners in the EU and other international partners for this opportunity to join this very timely discussion, because it's not only the 10th anniversary of Maidan, but it's also an important time in Ukraine. As Mr. Sobolev mentioned earlier this morning, there's ongoing discussions, active debates in parliament right now regarding this ongoing debate on corporate governance. So I think that it's really a timely discussion to bring us together and discuss the ins and outs of these topics. You mentioned a longstanding cooperation between the OECD and Ukraine. Absolutely. This covers all sorts of policy areas. We work on a multidisciplinary approach, and as most of you know, OECD is really a standards institution, a policy institution, and we work through our intergovernmental process, through our committees, and Ukraine is actively engaging with the OECD as part of course, its accession aspirations. And this long-standing cooperation in corporate governance of SOEs is one area. But I'm really pleased to say that as of this summer, we have renewed this cooperation for at least another 4 years and for the foreseeable future, most likely, with an agreement between the government of Ukraine and OECD to continue to work together. So the focus of this work will really be to strengthen institutions and to focus on governance, to focus on transparency, to focus on anti-corruption, attracting private sector investment into the economy, and laying basically the foundations for long-term investment. So I'm saying this because we also heard in the introductory remarks a lot of the support that our other partners are giving to Ukraine in this area, and the OECD, of course, we work hands in hand with you on these aspects. So obviously one area of focus of this program will be to follow up on the very close cooperation we had with Ukraine in the past and before the war on corporate governance of state-owned enterprises. You mentioned, Milika, that Ukraine aspires to adhere to the OECD guidelines on corporate governance of SOEs. I was actually really pleased that Olena mentioned that they're being even used or thought about in law proceedings, in court proceedings. It's really quite interesting for us to hear from a policy standpoint. And of course, there's no coincidence that there's emphasis on this. We heard this morning all the reasons, the rationales for why the governance of SOEs is important. It's critical in terms of not only amidst wartime today, in terms of the rapid response measures that SOEs are today undertaking, but also in terms of the future economic development and what Ukraine's vision is for its future, but as well, the expectations for international partners, as well as its accession aspirations into the EU and OECD. So these SOEs are obviously very strategic. In the case of Ukraine, they take on even another added exponential importance, given their size, given their weight in the current economy. So with that big sort of overall context, in 2001, we did a comprehensive review. It's a peer review process, so it involves the OECD Secretariat, but also our members, so state practitioners of SOEs, really people responsible for the oversight of and governance of SOEs in their national government. So we do this as part of a peer review process. And already before the war, we were working very closely with individual SOEs. So we worked with Naftogaz, we worked with Ukrenergo. I was pleased to see Mr. Kudryski online. We worked very... okay, great, because we can't see the screen, so we're glad to hear he's still there. Of course, with our partners in EBRD and et cetera, on some of these more sectoral deep dives into corporate governance. And we heard Mr. Kudryski say this is a long journey. Corporate governance reform is not something that happens overnight. It takes time. And further to that work that we did this more comprehensive review of the corporate governance of SOEs. In 2021, we issued a report, and there are some key findings. So you asked me, how many of these recommendations are still valid today? And I would say all of them. I would say all of them. And of course, what's important is the prioritization of what reform should come first and the sequencing. So on this, I think we can agree. We heard Mr. Sobolev outline the plan for the next year. We understand the plan sounds very sensible in terms of what that looks like. I would place emphasis on a few areas because already nearly 10 years ago, this journey of corporate governance reform started. It started with one SOE, and it started expanding. And the government's reform intention at the time was to expand this reform to the top 15 SOEs. And I would say that reform intention, from what I hear, remains today. So one of the key areas is to continue this process of corporatization and implementing corporate governance reforms in these economically most important SOEs. So when that reform process started nearly 10 years ago, we had one SOE with a supervisory board that started this journey. Today, I think we're nearly at 8. So, in the last 10 years, we've seen 8 companies go through this journey. We hope to see even a more, let's say, sped up process for the next 8 to come. And it's not just about putting in boards. It's also, as you say, changing the corporate culture in these companies, really putting in place appropriate mechanisms and structures so that there's clear decision-making, and to separate that out from political interference, because these companies, again, they are out there in the marketplace, many of them in competition or potential competition with other enterprises. So the level playing field aspects that we heard are also absolutely critical and were among our recommendations we would continue to put forward as key, again, with the appropriate sequencing, especially right now in this sort of wartime period. Another key area, and that's very much front and center right now in the debate, is the legal and regulatory framework. So we identified that there are a number of inconsistencies. Olena mapped out for us all the various laws and regulations applicable to the SOE sector, as well as some gaps. We identified these gaps, and right now we understand that there is, let's say, political will to address this through a 5593D, which is this overarching law looking at SOE corporate governance. This is very important law because I think it will set the future for the next decade, if not more, of what corporate governance reform will look like in Ukraine. And we really hope for the best in terms of ensuring this legal framework is fit for purpose and really does align with the SOE guidelines in the way that sort of the reform intention is. And lastly, I would just add that, I mean, you can have a law, you can have many laws, but if you don't implement them, there's also a big, let's say, the law, you know, you can't have a credible reform. And in terms of supporting their implementation, you need, let's say, two to tango, if you will. On the one hand, you have the SOEs, so you've got these SOEs going through these major transformations and reforms, and there are growing pains associated with that. We heard that sometimes you can move one step forward, one step back. There are growing pains. But on the other side, you also need strong institutions. And I mentioned the OECD's focus is very much on these strong institutions. For us, it's critical that there is an ability on the part of the state as an owner to act as an active and informed owner. In the wartime period, I think we've seen a lot more of this active and ownership role because of the rapid response SOEs have been playing. But in the future, I think we need to see more strength and capacity and focus there, because I mean, you can't have an informed dialogue with the board, with the managing board, without having a clear sense of, okay, why do we own these companies in the first place, and what do we expect from them, and you know, what do we as a state expect in terms of dividends, in terms of the policy goals that we have, and how can we hold them accountable? And then you expect the boards, you know, to equally, you expect the state equally to be accountable to the general public, also to lenders and to other, also the market in terms of what its expectations are for its SOEs and how it plans on acting as a professional shareholder. So I think I'll stop there, but that's basically, in a nutshell, some of the key priorities we identified and that continue to be of relevance.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I will finish this first round of questions with Anna. Olena told us a little bit about context within Ukraine. Now, as Gert-Jan mentioned in the beginning, Ukraine's wish to join the European Union, it's the polar star guiding the country. The Commission has recently recommended the opening of accession negotiations, and we are awaiting the decision of the Council on this, and we are all, I think, very keenly following updates on the Ukraine facility and the Ukraine plan that will be linked to it. Where do you see the place of SOE reform in these important documents that will be, I would say, the anchor for Ukraine's growth and, to some extent, reconstruction? It will be an important link to European integration.
It's working. Maybe it's useful to think of it again in a similar way that Matteo structured some of his remarks at the beginning, that we need to look at the SOE sector at a systemic level, at a sectoral level, and at the level of the individual company. Then how the EU comes into the context that will be shaping the reform and the future of the Ukrainian SOEs, it's probably twofold. One is through the enlargement process, and the second one is to the policy conditionality that is currently tied to the financial support of the Union, and it will continue to be tied to the financial support under the Future Ukraine facility through the Ukraine plan, as it was already mentioned in the opening remarks by Hertjan Koppmann. In terms of the enlargement process, some people might tell you, oh, but the Union doesn't have any acquis on the SOE governance. That's correct. But that doesn't mean that the SOE sector is not regulated in the Union. It is actually very heavily regulated in terms of how the state and the state-owned companies communicate with each other in terms of the transparency of financial flows. I think that's the first one. You have a directive of the transparency of the financial relations between public companies and the government. And that is one of the basic tenets of the Union acquis that is a foundation for the functioning market economy with the publicly owned companies and the privately owned companies. You will find specific recommendation in the Commission enlargement report adopted on the 8th of November that pertain to state-owned enterprises. You will find them in the chapter that has to do with the economic performance of the country, and that is again very crucial. The path to EU accession goes not only through the approximation of the Union legislation, it goes through being a functioning democracy, so so-called political Copenhagen criteria, of a market economy that is capable of withstanding competitive pressure in the internal market. And this is where, the key in terms of what part of the economy and companies are actually making money, whether they are public or private, and if they are not making money, why they're still in the market. It's a fairly basic question that would define the ability of the Ukrainian economy to grow to the benefit of its people, to grow to the benefit of the recovery and reconstruction, and eventually its ability to compete on the internal market. Third, you have a lot of sectoral legislation. Now we have Ukrenergo here on the panel. Energy is regulated, transport is regulated. In general, you have requirements in terms of independent regulators that will set a lot of sectoral legislation, and companies that operate in this market have to comply with those. There's a lot of work to be done in Ukraine. And last but not the least, you have state aid control rules. That is actually already applicable in Ukraine because in the association agreement, you have one of the most ambitious chapters in terms of applicability of state aid control in Ukraine to be performed by the Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine. So as such, they should be applied, which again goes back to the conditions of competitions and the transparency. So at what conditions does the state-owned company operate in the market? So the EU enlargement track of Ukraine, and again, depending on the decision of the European Council in December, will be a source of reform agenda and the implementation checks on all these levels that will very much shape how the SOE sector, but therefore also state ownership towards them, will look in the future. And I think it's very encouraging what we heard from Alexei this morning. And that's, again, part of our discussions in terms of Ukraine plan. It does start with the definition by the state of the state ownership policy in terms of what it wants from its state-owned companies and what it doesn't, which again ties well with what Sarah says in terms of defining basically the way the state intervenes in the economy via its state-owned companies. Without that clarity, it's very difficult to see how you will liberate the market share for private capital to step in and provide the absolutely needed investments which are there for the recovery and reconstruction and further modernization of the country. The second track by which the Union intends to support these reforms is the current and the future financial support, where some of the aid will be tied to specific reforms. This is, again, what is being prepared on the Ukrainian side as part of the Ukrainian plan. And again, once the legislative process in the Union is done, we would be able to formally approve it and start implementation. But you can expect both the enlargement track and the financial support track to be very strong drivers of the reforms in the state-owned companies in Ukraine going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you all. We took an hour for this first round, and while I have prepared for two, I think given the time that we took for the first one, it might be wiser to open it at this stage to the audience and to hear questions from you, and I will then return to the panelists with the second round and the concluding remarks so that we have both interaction and ability to return to panelists in time. So the floor is yours, and let's hear the questions from the audience. No, that's always a tricky moment. Please go ahead, and can I please ask you to introduce yourself?
Sergei Kasyanov, Harvard Alumni Club of Brussels. I want to ask, what is the optimal size of the public property in the Ukrainian economy? What do you think, Maxim?
Thank you. Would there be somebody who volunteers to take this one? Would it probably, I think, Volodymyr, you were talking about privatizing 90, it was, what you suggested was more than 95% of SOEs, but this still doesn't give us an indication of what is the percentage that would, what is sort of the percentage of state on the output of the state sector would still be, because I assume that the biggest ones would still remain state dominated. So would you want to comment on this one, and then I might take it to other panelists?
Yeah, I think I can at least start. I think that I was actually referring to the number of companies, of course, that have to be privatized or closed. But I think it also coincides with the share of non-state capital in the economy, private capital in the economy, 90 to 95%. Ideally, as close to zero as possible. This is my understanding, and I'm saying this as a head of a state-owned company, which is also a natural monopoly. But I need to say that, again, it is only to the extent that such companies can act as Western public corporations, we are only able to achieve high results. And also, we are able to ensure or facilitate our accession to EU. So as much private sector as possible in the economy, in terms of profit.
Thank you very much, Volodymyr. Would any of you want to comment on this additionally? Anna?
Happy to comment. As an economist, I can only agree with my previous speaker. As a Commission official, two remarks. First of all, the Union Treaty is neutral on ownership. So there is no preference for any private ownership, as member states can define how they intervene in the economy, provided that comply with the union law and stated rules. Second, the size of the public sector in our member states is very different. They have different traditions. They organize their economies differently. However, what matters is the efficiency and the terms of engagement. So if a company is run as a private company and state is the owner and the shareholder, if the public service obligation is clearly defined, if you don't have cross-subsidization for the remuneration that the company receives for its non-commercial activities, as opposed to how it engages in the market, then the conditions for competition towards the others are clear, and then everybody's happy and the internal market functions. If this is not the case, I'm sure you're aware of the long enforcement history by European Commission towards state-owned companies in member states, from Deutsche Post to Alitalia. This has been a very powerful instrument to open up markets, which then brings normally better services to the users, at the same time perfectly preserving the state objectives in which they intervene in the economy. And those, especially in the conditions of the war and the martial law, are undeniable. But there is no contradiction between defining those and pursuing the reforms that will get us to a performing state-owned companies that remain in the market. What matters is that the company is making money.
Thank you very much. And this is indeed something that we also see in the EBRD. I think the attitudes towards state ownership are changing. And while we have a very clear private focus as an international financial institution, we then, understanding this, try to help the state sector reform and function in lines of, in a way that you've described, so as to make sure that there is room for private private sector, and where there is state presence, that it is efficient and bound by the rules. Would there be more questions from the audience? Please.
Panagiotis Tamoulis, European Commission Great Service, and also sitting in Kiev in the EU delegation. I would like to ask Mrs. Kibenko, since you mentioned about the debt moratoria, this is not a corporate governance issue, but it's a justice issue and a level playing field issue, because private companies need to pay their debts, but SOEs do not. But this is a huge problem. If you unblock all these debt moratoria, if you undo them, then the economy will collapse. So would you, since you have worked on the matter, would you like to briefly comment on what would be the ideal solution? Thank you.
Thank you. It's an interesting question because actually our panel, I was judge reporter, we transferred this case to the Grand Chamber exactly with the same argumentation as you just said, that if we removed all this moratorium at once, it would be collapsed in our economy, and it was just before the war, the full-fledged war and attack from Russian Federation. So we moved this case to the Grand Chamber and asked to overrule this position, because we see a significant risk for our economy in such ruling, and the Grand Chamber does it. And in our motivation, we also mentioned that actually moratorium should be removed, but it should be done by legislation, not by judge, adjudication, by judge decision, but by our parliament with some transition terms, how to be decide with this property how to defend our national interest and so on. So we decided that the moratorium is a political question and should be decided by a legislator, not by judges. It's like a I like judges' activism, but this is more close to judge restriction. So it's not good for judges to interfere in such sphere. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Do we have another question? If not, then maybe I would ask something that from all of our participants, or whoever wants to take it, is we've talked a lot why this matters for investors and how this will allow economic recovery of the country. How do you see this as being relevant for the trust of Ukraine's citizens? Ukrainians want to see the European future, but I think they see in the European future a way of ensuring Ukraine where the use of funds is efficient, transparent, and where there is no corruption as business as usual, so to speak. So how do you see this as a trust-building exercise internally? Start with Volodymyr, because the success of Ukrenergo is definitely something which, on which I would say the trust of the Ukrainian citizens rests as well.
Well, you know, we've become known inside the country and to some extent even popular when we started to switch off lights. This is the paradox that I always try to tell last winter, but this trust building exercise from our side was founded on the fact that we actually were able to perform our main function to keep the system running, but also on the fact that we actually brought our electric system into EU already last year. And because EU accession is becoming a very important element of our even national idea of Ukrainians, it's probably one of the biggest national aspirations of Ukrainian people. I think it's important to explain that the EU accession cannot be done without good governance. You cannot access EU with poorly governed organizations, and this is not only for corporate sector. This is true for all organizations in this country, from the public sector of economy. So I think that it's really important to be very, very sincere and transparent to people, to tell them truth and to tell them also about difficulties on this path of transforming organizations. And of course, it's important to demonstrate leadership in that, so that people will not start to believe in a good transformation case from day one. They will only start to believe when they will see results. And of course, this combination of practical results with transparency and good reputation can really boost public trust into corporate governance reform and really make also politicians to speed up on this track.
Thank you very much. If I go to Olena and ask you, from this people dimension, how does it feel to drive reform process without something which is rather conservative institution? And how do you see it as important, again, internally for trust enhancement with the citizen?
Thank you. It's very interesting questions. Actually, after the Revolution of Dignity, it was a strong demand from our society to remove all judges. It was like a question of trust. And according to this demand, for example, our Supreme Court was completely renewed in 2017. And 30% come from outside of the court system, and we try to change the Supreme Court just to renew the trust of people in this institution. And for me, it was interesting. I found the principles of governance of the Supreme Courts. It was prepared by some European institutions, and it was like combine of approach of 26 of Supreme Court of different European countries, and we try to implement that in the activity of the Supreme Court. And the main aim of our movement was just to make people trust judges, trust the Supreme Court. And for example, we try to improve Supreme Court communication. In this field, we make a special working group, and we try to use modern channels of communication. For example, we open Facebook account, and our page now has 60,000 users. It's a lot. It's like a legal magazine, for example, or paper, and this resource is very popular. Also, we have a Telegram channel. In Telegram channel, we have 15,000 users. In Telegram, we talk about new court decision, court judgments. And we have even Instagram. And Instagram, we are talking about legal profession, about judicial profession. We recommend our readers some book or movie about the legal profession, about judges, about lawyers, and we have about 10,000 users in Instagram. And I think these changes make our Supreme Court more transparent, more open to the people, and it helps us to obtain trust from the people. And I think the Supreme Court, like any another organization, commercial or uncommercial, move on this way, and it's good for us, and good for Ukraine, and good for our people.
Thank you. Driving reform during wartime is not easy, and I think the Ukrainians understand also that being grounded in the EU accession process and having international partners on your side is an important factor in this success. Now, both for the EU and for the OECD, making sure that you support the reform requests while also understanding how to time it to achieve the best results will be relevant. How do you see also the importance of communicating, making the citizens aware and bringing them along in this process so that they understand the timing and what is ahead of them, and that certain things will take time, and will also, while you understand that they will take time, that it is important to start and to move along this process. So this is for both Anna and Sarah, and whoever wants to start.
Okay, I'll take a first stab at it, but no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we heard already the call for transparency, and I think that around this overall reform, there's a great need to be transparent. You brought the question of trust up earlier, and it made me think, all corporate governance reform is all about trust building, isn't it? Because it's about addressing principal-agent problems, right? But oftentimes, corporate governance, when reforms are being rolled out, actually the perception from the public, or the perception from maybe those who are less aware of the potential for this reform, because in the case of Ukraine, for example, the corporate governance reform really started with the state-owned sector versus starting with the private corporate sector. So there wasn't really a private sector example to follow. It started with the state-owned sector. So from a communication perspective, it's a challenge, because here you're advocating for rules and processes that to some extent may feel or look to the outside as if the state is losing control. But in fact, it's about reinforcing control, but through very let's say, transparent and, let's say, healthy ways of decision making. So there's a bit of a conundrum because on the one hand, it's hard to sell because the reform from the outside may look as if the state is taking a step back. Whereas from the inside, for the reformers and for those who are following the advantage and the potential benefits for this reform, there are many, many things to come. So I think the success stories are key to highlight in terms of how this reform can be successful. We heard some of those case studies, and I think it can resonate with individuals very closely because as they see their public services improve, as they see, you know, the real boots on the ground in the role of the SOEs today in the wartime economy, but in the future there'll be perhaps more, let's say, understanding of why this sector is important in terms of how individuals really feel impacted in the day-to-day lives, but more broadly, a broader understanding for the importance of these reforms. So that's why I think indeed communication is key.
Thank you. How does it look like on your end, Anna?
I think this is incredibly important because the process of a very deep transformation of a sector that accounts for, was it 18% of employment, is going to be painful. So coming back to the triage that Deputy Minister mentioned this morning, so deciding which companies to keep and restructure and corporatize. So and corporatize, I would add, and restructure, which to close down and which to privatize has massive implications for people. First and foremost, has implications for employment. It might be geographically very differently distributed. So you will, as it happened to a number of economies in our member states, you will probably first see the pain of it before you see the benefits that Sarah mentioned. So communication and explaining this is incredibly, incredibly important. I think transparency is also very important. So explaining the fiscal cost that it currently has to the state and what you will avoid, or how you will cut your losses and you will not have the fiscal cost in the future, is also part of the conversation. And Ukraine, of all its really, really great features, has a very vibrant civil society. So I think the country is well equipped to undertake a very transparent communication about what different companies and therefore communities will have to go through in order to get to the better outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think what both of you said is really important, because this reform road and the road to membership is not going to be easy, straightforward, or probably not very quick. And it is important to communicate, that there will be difficult things and ultimately why they are done and what is actually the cost of keeping things unreformed. If there are no more questions from the audience, I would then conclude with just asking you if you have any concluding comment, or basically just to give me one step which you think is really relevant to take this reform forward in, say, not immediate, but reasonably immediate future. So what would be your one priority that you would give me for the SOE and governance reform in the, say, next 6 months or so? And if you have any concluding comments that you would want to share, you're of course very welcome. And I have to apply positive discrimination and start from Volodymyr again.
Thank you. One word: privatization.
Thank you. That is clearly a very clear sense of priority. Anna.
2 words. Definition of public service obligation, transparency, and implementing separation of accounts. Transparency of financial flows between the state and state-owned companies.
Thank you very much, and I'm really glad to hear both of you talking about things which we as an institution would be very, very happy to support implementing. Olena.
I think introduction, director, personal liability for damage gives to the company.
Sarah, what would be, you have the honor to close the circle.
Well, that's a tall ask, and I think the reform laid out by Deputy Minister Sobolev really, I think, sets the goals and the benchmark. So what we would like to see is that being implemented and rolled out, this legislative reform that's on the agenda. It's been 10 years in the making. It would be a missed opportunity not to get it right. So that would be my closing remark.
Thank you very, very much, all of you. I think we can give our participants a round of applause. I think it will be a not speedy process, but will be a very important one, and all of us will be partners supporting you in this, and we will be working together to help the country deliver. So I think this is just one of the conversations that we are going to have in this process, and very much looking forward to supporting the implementation with the Ukrainian partners and working together with all the international partners to help deliver this goal. I don't think any one of us on our own will be able to help deliver this outcome. It takes all to be able to move. So thanks again. Best of luck for keeping the lights for the Ukrainians this winter, and thank you very much for all of you to coming, and looking forward to continuing this conversation.
If you allow me the final word, I want to thank you, Milica, and your team, and particularly Julia also, for co-organizing this event. And also I want to thank my team here in Brussels, Eugenia, Yasmin, Larissa, and Mattia, and everyone who was watching online, and of course to all of you here in the room. Thank you very much. Now we have a small sandwich lunch for those who are already hungry. I know some who might be, but also for having some more conversation and networking. Thank you, and have a nice day.